everyone, I'm Rachel Gallender and welcome to my channel. Growing up, did you ever envision that creating a family would be a romantic and beautiful thing? Well, I did, but this was simply not going to be my reality. I got married when I was 24 years old. 2 years later, my husband and I were ready to start having kids. I went off of birth control and I never got a period again. I had been taking birth control since I was 18 years old, and granted at this time I was 26, so I had been on it for quite some time. And, month after month after month went by, and I was thinking, that's weird. I took a pregnancy test, I wasn't pregnant, but my period never came. And so this was very surprising to me, very unusual. For years I had been used to, having a regular period, and so this was just very strange, and I had a feeling that something was just not right. So come December, I called my gynecologist and I said, I think I need to schedule an appointment. This is what's going on. And of course, with the holidays and people traveling, I didn't get seen until January. And so at the end of December, my family and I had gone to Mexico. We had a wonderful trip. We came back in January and I was ready to figure out what was going on in my body. And so my doctor had said, this is very strange. You've been used to having a regular period, and you should be able to get one. So what I want to do is I want to give you some medication to induce a period. And I would take it for 10 days, and then I'd wait 10 days. And then my period was supposed to magically come. After the 10-day period of waiting, I never got it. And they ran blood work to try to check my hormone levels, and they tried it again. So I took medication for 10 days, and then I waited for another 10 days, little to find no period. And so at this point, it was now towards the end of February, and my doctor, was basically kind of dumbfounded. And she's like, this should have worked. I'm not quite sure why you're not getting a period. However, you kind of have two paths moving forward. She said, if you would like, you can see an endocrinologist, a hormone doctor, or you could see a fertility specialist if kids are in your future. And so, of course, my husband and I were trying to conceive, and so that was our goal. And we called a fertility specialist, and we weren't able to get seen until the next month, which was only March, and that was fine. And they ran a gamut of tests. My ovaries were fine, my fallopian tubes were fine, my uterus was fine, everything was fine. My doctor, she even used the term move-in ready. She's like, your body is move-in ready. And she said, but for some reason, you're not getting a period. And so if you're not getting a period, you can't get pregnant. And so she said, what we have to do is we've got to first figure out how to get you a period. That's our first step, and then we can go from there. I was put on medication to induce a period. Sure enough, the new medication plan that I was put on, it did work. And so I was thrilled. I was hopeful that, that was it. I could start trying and we could have a happy life. And so little did I know, I was in for a rude awakening, and I was not prepared for the news that I was about to get. On my 27th birthday, I had an appointment with my doctor, and she said, you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, you have PCOS. And I had never heard of this before, of course. And I was like, okay, well, what is that? And she's like, well, it's basically, you don't get a period for any unexplainable reason. And so I was saying, okay, well, where do we go from here? And she kind of presented my options, and there were a couple of options. And one option was to not pursue fertility treatment and basically not have kids, because if I'm not ovulating, I'm not going to get pregnant. So that was one option, and to me, this option really wasn't an option at all, because I felt like I was destined to be a mother, and so that was really frustrating to hear. The next two options involved IUIs, which had a very low % chance of success rate, and for me, I wanted to just get pregnant tomorrow if possible. And so for me, having a low % success rate, it was just really frustrating to hear. The next option was, pursuing surgery of some kind, which was not recommended to me given my age and my facility. And then the last option, of course, was in vitro fertilization. I knew nothing about any of this. I I figured, growing up that I would just be able to have a family the typical way. It would be beautiful, it would be romantic, it would be something to remember. When my mom got pregnant with my brother, it was so easy for her. She was on birth control, she used a condom, and she got pregnant. This was not in the cards for me. To see a fertility specialist when I was 26, 27 years old, and to find out that I needed to have IVF. Nobody prepared me for that. The hardest part was that I didn't know anybody else who was getting pregnant, let alone anybody who needed fertility treatment. So I was in my own world, and I was completely alone. Finding out I had PCOS was like life-changing. I had felt like my world was shattered. And even though there were options that were presented to me, I went through a period of just disbelief, and it took me some time to really come to terms with the fact that at 27 I needed to have fertility treatment. I couldn't get past it, but I knew that I needed to in order to have the family that I wanted to have. For those of you who aren't aware, PCOS affects over 160 million women worldwide, which is roughly 1 out of 10 women. Which then made me think, okay, 1 out of 10 women, how did I get to be the lucky one, right? I don't know, I will never know, but it is what it is, and I had to move on. I had to go about my choices and pick from what was kind of presented to me. And there were a couple of different obstacles which ultimately led my husband and I to making the decision that we did. At this time, it was March 25th, which was my birthday, when I had found out all this information, and we were switching our insurance plan. We were switching it September 1st. And so that was in the back of our mind, and our fertility treatment would not be covered under this new plan, unfortunately. So we felt pressed for time, which was definitely a factor in everything that we had decided. And so in addition to that, I had mentioned earlier in my video that my family and I went to Mexico. And in Mexico, there was Zika exposure. And so also, little did I know that if you have Zika exposure, you have to quarantine for a period of time before you could begin to try to conceive. Especially if you are undergoing fertility treatment, your doctor will not allow you to even begin anything until your quarantine is up. The quarantine was 6 months, which meant that I could not begin until summertime, which to me was only a couple months away, but it was devastating. I wanted to start tomorrow. I wanted to get pregnant as soon as possible, and I had to just wait because of the quarantine that I didn't know even existed in terms of fertility treatment. And the reason that there is a quarantine is because it could lead to birth defects. So I can appreciate, the process and the need to wait, but in my mind, it was so frustrating to cope with and to just wait. Needless to say, once our quarantine was up, we were ready to begin. We decided to undergo IVF with much consideration. And so, that being said, I was able to begin IVF towards the end of June of that year, and I learned about the process. It was a very huge undertaking that though I had learned about it, nobody had prepared me mentally for what I was about to experience, and I think that was the hardest thing of all. Everybody talks about, IVF leads to babies, and that's terrific. And that's, the success rate was what I was told was 65 to 75%, and it seemed so promising, and that's what I had to hold on to. But it didn't make any of it any easier. My stimulation phase was 11 days long, but at day 7, I was at risk for something called ovarian hyperstimulation. I was explained, because I'm not a doctor, full disclosure, I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to give medical advice. I'm just sharing what my experience was and what I've been told about my journey. So your ovaries, I've been told, are about the size of your thumb, and when you take fertility medication, they increase to nearly the size of a tennis ball. And hyperstimulation is when your ovaries are so stimulated from the medication that you're producing so many follicles. And when you have so many follicles in your ovaries, it's extremely dangerous for your body. Another risk was possibly experiencing ovarian torsion, which was another huge fear of mine. I'm a very active person. I have always been. I'm a very healthy person, so for me to, not exercise during this process, though it was mentally challenging, I was truly afraid to have ovarian torsion. So I listened. I didn't do any physical activity, but in terms of ovarian hyperstimulation, there was nothing that I could have done to prevent it until day 7, when they said, wow, your body is producing so many follicles that we need to slow down the inflammation that is going on in your body. So to do that, to prevent ovarian hyperstimulation, which would have ultimately canceled my cycle, I was put on a high salt, high protein electrolyte diet. So I remember sprinkling my food with salt, eating protein nonstop, just having Gatorade at all hours of the day. My whole counter was just filled with Gatorade, and I was doing everything that I could to prevent this from actually happening and taking my experience away from me, which they would need to cancel ultimately. So with close monitoring, of course, I was going in every other day to every day, and my levels started to improve. The pain that my body was experiencing, though I was still very inflamed, it wasn't progressing. It was just kind of staying. And so my doctor felt comfortable with, moving me forward in the process and allowing me to move on to the retrieval phase. When I had the retrieval phase, I had about 44 follicles. For those of you who don't know, a follicle eventually turns into an egg. And so of the 44 follicles, I had 41 eggs, which is a lot. That's a lot of eggs, is what I'm told. And so of the 41 eggs that I had, there were 34 which were matured, but 32 of them actually fertilized once they met with the sperm. So I had 32 fertilized eggs, okay? And so those all turned into embryos. The next part of my process was the transfer. This was done for me on day 5. And so 11 of my embryos were in the early blastocyst phase. And so of the 21 remaining, they implanted the best looking embryo. It kind of makes me think of like a beauty contest where they picked the best one out of them all. So I had 21 to choose from. They put the best one in my body. After day 6, though my transfer was over, they still allow the embryos to continue growing. After day 6, there were 17 embryos that were viable. And so they ended up freezing the 17 embryos. And then comes the waiting period. And again, nobody had prepared me for how difficult this period of time was going to be. Just 10 days of just waiting and hoping and praying and just really truly thinking that this was all going to work, and all of the hard work and all of the nasty symptoms that your body goes through, and all of the shots, which this was a couple years ago, but I, for some reason, still have all of my shots. I don't know why. I feel like it was, it was such a part of me. Like every shot was like a little bit of pain. And I really feel like I accomplished something with it all. And so, yes, the shots are painful. Yes, there are headaches. Yes, there are nasty symptoms. You feel bloated. You feel disgusting. Truly, every part about you. My body looked like I was pregnant because of the inflammation. So I was walking around and I felt horrible. But I couldn't do anything. I just had to wait, and I just had to sit there. And I I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know who to talk to. Again, I knew nobody going through being pregnant, trying to be pregnant, or even just going through fertility treatment. And this was just a true period of isolation for me. My family was supportive, of course. My husband was, of course, very supportive, and he saw my struggles day in and day out, but nobody knew how to help me internally, and it was so challenging. Once the 10 days were up, I went in for my HCG test, and that basically assesses the pregnancy hormone of your body. And so it's a more accurate version of, I call it the pee on the stick test, right? And so I went in the morning, and I was anxious all day. I came home, and I waited, and I'm a teacher, and so this was during the summertime, and if I had been working, I would have had something to distract my mind, but of course, it was the summer, and so there was nothing to distract my mind, and I was truly just waiting. And at about 4 o'clock, I received a phone call, and it was my nurse, and she's very energetic and peppy, which I always appreciate, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, get to the point. And so she said, oh, so have you tried to take your own pregnancy test yet? She's like, when I went through this all, I couldn't wait the 10 days, and I kind of cheated, and I figured out that I was pregnant before I actually found out. And I said, no, it had never really occurred to me that I should try to take my own pee on a stick pregnancy test. I just kind of waited. I suppose I could have. And so that kind of led me to think, all right, well, after this call, depending on how it goes, maybe I'll just go and take one just to have that experience. And so she ends up telling me that, yes, I was pregnant with the one embryo that they put in my body, and I was over the moon, as I'm sure you could imagine. And then the call ended, and I went to go take my pregnancy test with a pee on the stick version, and it showed that I was negative. It did not show that I was pregnant, and I was so confused. You know how they always say that, the pregnancy tests are about 99% accurate? Well, go figure. I was the 1 out of 10 women who gets PCOS, and I'm that 1% of the 100% of people who the pregnancy test was not accurate for. Go figure. So that was a bizarre experience, but I held on to the fact that I knew that my blood test was far more accurate than the test that I had taken shortly after the call. My nurse had confirmed that I was pregnant, and so that was my story. I went on, and I had a healthy pregnancy. We had a baby boy, and he is the joy. He's the light of my world. His name is Jeremy Seth, and you'll get to learn about him later on. But you might be wondering, you were successful the first time through IVF. Why are you sharing your story? And I think that's a very legitimate question. For a very long time, I really pondered sharing my story with others or not. And then I started to compare my journey with other people's journeys that I had been hearing about. And I felt like my journey didn't compare to the pain that other people experienced. Even though I too felt pain, and I felt that isolation, I felt the loneliness that was associated with this all, and then I went through the process, I felt like my story wasn't good enough. And it wasn't until my current experience that really pushed me over the edge to the point where I felt like I have to share my story because I need to encourage other people to share theirs as well. The journey of fertility or infertility is such an under-talked journey that people don't know about. I think it is so important to educate others and to tell people your story so that if they know somebody going through this, that they know how to support them, that they know how to just be there. Because it is such a difficult time in the person's life, and you'll find out if you subscribe and watch my next video what really it is that pushed me over the edge.